Jon Kaji is a council member from the city of Torrance, California, and has remained a notable figure in the Japanese-American business world for decades now. His resume includes helping start the Japanese-American National Museum in Little Tokyo in the 1970s, running for city treasurer in Gardena, representing the state of California as the director of trade and foreign investment in Japan and South Korea, and now serving as an elected official in his hometown. Thanks for doing this, Jon.
Happy to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. My family has been in Southern California for over 100 years. My great-grandfather, my maternal great-grandfather, was farming out in the San Gabriel Valley. His son went to medical school in Japan, immigrated to California, and when he got here, his father returned back to Japan. So that grandfather helped to establish the Japanese Hospital of Los Angeles. It required
When was this? The hospital?
They established the hospital in the 1920s, and they organized a corporation. However, the state of California had alien land laws, which prevented Japanese from owning land. And so he and his doctor friends lawyered up. They filed a lawsuit against the state of California, which ultimately went to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in 1926, in the case of Tashiro versus Jordan, the Supreme Court held for the plaintiffs, my grandfather, Dr. Tashiro, stating that this fell within the commercial treaty between Japan and the U.S. So that was sort of the family's first foray in the I guess in the area of community involvement and activism. That was followed by my father, Bruce, who was very active.
This was your first generation, right? The Issei generation, which sued all the way to the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Wow.
And that was rarely done back in those days in the 1920s.
Yeah, I was going to say there's probably a few cases of Japanese Americans suing, but Ozawa v. U.S. I think is the big one in 22.
Right.
But you don't really hear a lot about that.
Right. So that focused on land acquisition within the community. And subsequently, my father, Bruce, he and his family were, as a result of Executive Order 9066, were sent to Manzanar Relocation Center. He graduated Manzanar High School, was drafted into the U.S. Army. While he was in basic training, the war ended in Europe, which was fortunate for him because he was going to be a replacement in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the all-Japanese-American military unit. He was then routed based on his Japanese language abilities to Fort Snelling, where he underwent language studies at the Military Intelligence Language School. He was then sent to Tokyo during the occupation, and then subsequently he was rerouted to Manila, where he served as both an interpreter and translator for the War Crimes Tribunal, which was held there in 1946.
This was in Tokyo?
This was in Manila,
Manila, okay.
The Philippines. And then finally he said, I need to get back to the United States, so he was honorably discharged and then returned to Los Angeles.
Wow. Your father was also big in the Japanese business world, especially here in the South Bay. I think I remember reading somewhere that he was actually one of the many people who helped bring the Toyota plant here, which was here from, I think, the 1960s all the way until 2015. Tell me about that a little bit.
Sure. When my father returned to L.A. Under the GI Bill, he attended the University of Southern California, where he got his bachelor's degree in accounting. He decided to set up his own accounting practice, which he set up in the early 1950s. And it was at that time that he was contacted by a local Japanese-American attorney by the name of Kenji Ito, and also the Japanese consulate, because there was a new Japanese company that planned to establish operations in Los Angeles. Some name like Toyota Motor Sales. So that was, I think, around 1953. And so Bruce was able to take on their account. They established a dealership in Hollywood, the first one, and then also established Toyota Motor Sales and started importing the Toyopet Crown for sale in the U.S. market. So I remember my dad being a nice guy. He decided to buy one of these early Toyota Crowns, handed it to my mother.
That's the model that they had in the 50s and 60s.
That's
Discontinued it, and then now it's back, right? Is that the one?
Well, they brought it over. It was terrible design, underpowered, could barely get up to speed on the freeways. And so consequently, it didn't sell. So the company pulled that off the market, but they maintained sales of their Land Cruiser, which American farmers seemed to like. So eventually they did retool. They did come back to the market, and Toyota Motor Sales eventually expanded operations by coming to the city of Torrance. And then eventually...
What year was that? When
that
the
was...
plant came?
They probably... they were first close to Gardena, I think in the city strip area. They moved to the city of Torrance probably in the late 1970s, early 1980s, where they built their 100-acre campus.
What would you say in this sort of post-war world, 45 onward until maybe about the 60s or 70s, how did the Japanese American community and then the Japanese American business community, how did that evolve? What was the process? Obviously, post-war, post-internment, and how does your family and your background kind of fit into all of that?
Because of Executive Order 9066, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt, Japanese Americans were deemed enemies of the state. And that led to the incarceration, the mass incarceration of all Japanese Americans on the West Coast. So the loss to the community was huge. In today's dollars, it would be the multi-billions of dollars. Loss of business, loss of land, personal properties. Their bank accounts were frozen. So coming back to the West Coast and trying to reestablish business, it was tough. They had to start from nothing. For a few families who were able to have neighbors or friends maintain their businesses while they were in the camps, they had something. But for the mass majority, they had to start from scratch. Many highly educated Nisei had no options except to become gardeners. And so here you have highly educated, highly skilled individuals who were going from door to door trying to get gardening jobs. It was a big humiliation, and yet with a minimal of complaining, a lot of Nisei just knew that I have to take care of our families, I have to take care of my parents, and so they just put their heads down and did whatever they needed to do to move forward.
And how would you say that evolved into, obviously the Japanese community is doing much better now. The business community, I would say, is much stronger now than how it was post-war. What was that evolution like in the first 30 years, to go back to my original question? Sure.
So for Bruce and other Nisei or second-generation Japanese Americans, the return to Little Tokyo and reestablishing business took a great effort on everyone's part. To their credit, they knew that they had to work together to recreate their own economy because they were not able to be, they weren't allowed to be hired by any major companies because they had an anti-Japanese hiring policy.
When was that overturned?
Eventually it went away after the war, but upon returning in the late 40s into the 1950s, if you're a Japanese American, like my dad, a CPA, you could not get hired by any major accounting firm. They just wouldn't hire you. So instead, for my father, because he grew up in Boyle Heights before the war, which had a large Jewish community, through those contacts, he was able to get experience in Jewish-owned accounting firms. So the multi-ethnic connections, the Jewish community, Black community, Latino community, all helped to transition the Japanese Americans back to the West Coast. And so for Bruce and his friends, they also decided that they wanted to begin to buy homes. They were unable to buy homes in certain areas because of restrictive racial covenants, which specifically stated if you were Black, Latino, or Asian, you could not buy a home in this particular housing tract. That's when areas like Gardena opened up, eventually cities like Torrance. But they also felt that there was a need to create a financing operation. So my father and others formed what was called a savings and loan. That industry no longer exists, but
would you say it's because of those restrictive housing policies? Is that why the Japanese American community shifted from urban centers like Little Tokyo to the South Bay?
There was because they could now move beyond the Little Tokyo ghetto, the community began to expand into areas like mid-cities, Los Angeles, the Crenshaw district, West LA, Sawtelle. As far as the South Bay, Gardena was probably one of the first landing areas, and then eventually into Torrance and the rest of the South Bay. So through Merit Savings, they were taking in deposits within the community, putting out those deposits in the form of home loans. And so here in Torrance and the South Bay, at Merit Savings, we probably generated thousands of home loans. And so today, for the Japanese American community that's here, many of the loans that enable them to buy their own house have now translated into a legacy of family wealth, which has grown over the years. So as you know, home values in Torrance are now north of $1 million. When the community was coming in the 1950s and 60s, you could buy a home for $25,000, $30,000. So you can see the multiplier effects in the buildup of equity.
The evolution of intergenerational wealth.
Right. So it's great to have been a part of providing that sort of home financing through Merit Savings, because ultimately it's helped to anchor the community and build up wealth.
And then where would you say you fit into all of this? I mean, when the 50s and 60s were happening, you were probably a teenager, right, in the 60s?
So I was born in the 50s.
Okay.
And growing up I was born in Boyle Heights at the Japanese hospital founded by my grandfather.
Wow.
We lived there for a few years, and then my folks decided it would be great to move to Gardena because that's where the Tashiro family had their home before the war on Gardena Boulevard. So they bought a house in Gardena, and I spent most of my time growing up in Gardena, spending weekends in Boyle Heights at my grandparents' house. But there was a sense that, at least in my family, as I looked to the legacy of my grandparents and also my father's activities, that you needed to be civically involved, that you had a duty and an obligation to give back. So I learned that from just an early age, and consequently I followed after my parents, who were active in church, active in civic activities in Gardena and the greater Los Angeles community.
And then in the 70s, you and your family was instrumental in helping start the Japanese American National Museum, JANM, which is now in Little Tokyo. Discuss your relationship with that, and then obviously your family's inspiration with how they were involved. Obviously your dad almost served in the 442nd, which is the famous Japanese American unit. Manzanar, break that down for me.
Sure. Well, maybe to give a preface to the founding of JANM. When my father returned to Little Tokyo in the 1950s, the city of Los Angeles had plans to use eminent domain to expand into the area, which is the Little Tokyo district. And so at the same time that the city of Los Angeles evicted residents out of Chavez Ravine for the construction of Dodger Stadium, they also took over an 8-block area for the construction of the LA Police Department headquarters. That was part of Little Tokyo proper. And so as a reaction to that, my father, along with Dr. Howard Toriumi of the Union Church of Los Angeles and others in Little Tokyo, organized themselves to act in a way to preserve the Little Tokyo district. And so,
has the jurisdiction of Little Tokyo changed over time?
Once the community,
from its historic boundaries?
Yeah, well, once the community organized itself and defined what the Little Tokyo district was geographically, that sent a notice to the city of Los Angeles that any further eminent domain stopped. But that also placed the burden on the local community to determine what can we as a small ethnic community do to rebuild our community and to stop any further incursion by the city of Los Angeles. So from the 60s into the 70s, my father and others were reaching out to Japanese companies. So in the 1970s, you had companies like the Hotel New Ohtani, Kojima, and others come into Little Tokyo.
Unrelated to the new famous Ohtani.
Yeah, unrelated, but that established the name Ohtani. So there was a wave of Japanese investment that started in the 70s, hit the peak during the 1980s. But that helped to inject capital into Little Tokyo. It led to new construction. And
was it foreign investment that helped fund JANM as well?
Okay, so in the lead up to JANM, the Nisei veterans held an event at the Los Angeles County Patriotic Hall. It really wasn't that popular, and that sort of signaled to the Nisei veterans that unless they took some steps to preserve their history, no one would remember. So it was at that time in the late 70s that the conversation started. There were veterans of the 100th and 442nd and the Military Intelligence Service that were invited by my father to Merit Savings. So the initial meetings that led to the idea of creating a museum were incubated within Merit Savings.
And that was the bank that he founded?
Correct. And so I was working at the bank at that time, and in the early stages, I reached out to a friend of mine who was on staff of Assemblymember Art Torres, who represented the Little Tokyo area, and we set up a time for the assembly member to meet with my father. And when we held our first fundraising event on a rainy day in downtown LA, very few turned out to the event. The assembly member turned out. He got up to speak and he said, when I go to Sacramento, I will introduce a bill to provide $1 million to help start the museum. By him simply saying that, suddenly legitimized the effort to create a museum. So it was very exciting to be involved at the front end, to reach out to friends in the community, elected officials, to get their support in the nascent, to-be-formed Japanese American National Museum.
You said at this time you were working at your dad's bank.
Correct.
When would you say the transition was, not just in the family business, but also being active in the local community? When do you think that transition happened between your dad sort of leading these efforts to when you started doing your own thing? And what would you say the first steps of that was?
So I grew up in Gardena. I graduated Gardena High School. attended the family church, Gardena Valley Baptist Church, and I was very active in my church. Also, other student activities on campus. Some were Christian related, others were Asian American. But during that time, I was very busy with friends and in establishing my own networks. So it seemed almost natural that as some of these other community-based efforts came online, which included the effort to obtain redress for the evacuation in 1942. I got involved with a group, the Japanese American Citizens League. So I was elected as the JACL. I was elected as the National Secretary Treasurer of the organization, and I was there at our national convention when in 1988 we suddenly got a call for the leadership to show up at the White House to meet with President Reagan because he was going to sign H.R. 442, the redress bill. So that was exciting.
The House resolution itself was called 442.
Correct.
Oh, that's ironic.
But it was significant, and there was a reason, of course. It tied in with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. So it was a very busy time in the community. That was the focus, but it also coincided with the formation of JANM, so that when redress checks were received, some of those checks went directly into JANM. And it was a great effort.
People gave up their redress checks and donated it to
Correct.
the museum.
That's right. So that was, I think, timing. The timing was perfect.
Would you say that was your first major involvement in the in activism on behalf of the Japanese American community?
Yeah, I think redress was one of those moments that unified the community, and I learned a lot through that effort because, as a small ethnic minority in the United States,
how difficult was it, and the fight and everything? Because how involved were you from start to finish?
So for my father and myself, we were registered Republicans. I would say a majority of those in the Japanese American community were registered Democrats. But in order to get redress over the line and signed by President Ronald Reagan, it did require a bipartisan approach. So for my father, for myself, and other Japanese American Republicans, we were tasked with reaching out to Republican members on the Republican side of the aisle, both in the House and in the Senate. So I remember during that time reaching out to members from California. I remember calling on the office of then U.S. Senator Pete Wilson and speaking with his staff. I didn't know that a few years later I would be working for Governor Wilson, but that's another story.
That's actually what I wanted to talk about. So Pete Wilson, right, becomes governor of California, appoints you to be, correct me if this is right, Director of Trade and Foreign Investment for the office in Tokyo and Seoul. What was the process between redress, which happens in, I think, 1988, and then you getting appointed to that position? What were you doing in between?
Okay.
That was your first introduction to Pete Wilson?
That was.
Okay.
So in the early 1980s, I was part of a delegation from Little Tokyo that went to Japan, to Nagoya, the sister city of the city of Los Angeles. And I remember while I was in Tokyo, I had spare time, and at that time there were phone books. So I pulled out the phone book at the Hotel New Ohtani, and I saw that there were a number of U.S. states that had representation in Japan, but there was no California representation. So coming back, this was 1983, I saw a friend named Kyle Mayatani who was working for a assembly member, Gwen Moore, from Culver City. And I said, hey, Kyle, I have an idea for an assembly bill for the state of California to establish a trade office in Tokyo. Well, guess what? That bill went forward. It was eventually signed into law by then Governor George Deukmejian, which called for opening a trade office both in Tokyo and in London. So in 1987, the office opened. I flew over to Tokyo because I was just happy to see this actually go all the way through.
Was that your first time in Japan?
No, I had been an exchange student while I was at USC. So I was at Waseda University for a year back in the 70s. But for me to see a bill actually go all the way through, be signed by the governor, resulting in this new trade office, I thought that was great.
So you organized the creation of this trade office, and then you got appointed to the position.
So I wasn't the first director. Another individual became the first director. He was there from the opening in 87 until 1992. The office was vacant. It didn't have a full-time director until Governor Wilson assumed the governorship. And then I was approached and asked if I would consider serving as the new directors, and I agreed to. So that was in late 1993.
And then how long were you there for?
I was there for almost 7 years.
7 years.
And
Wow.
it was a great time to be in Japan.
What was the Japanese business world like at this point? Obviously, 1991, Soviet Union collapses, Japan becomes the second largest economy in the world. What was it like being at the center of all of that?
So Japan in the 1980s was booming. You had books coming out, Japan is number one, touting Japan's manufacturing apparatus, taking over U.S. markets because it was more efficient, and everyone, and you saw Japanese investment rolling into the United States, the acquisition of Rockefeller Center, Pebble Beach, Riviera Country Club. However, at the end of the 80s into the 90s, that bubble economy collapsed. And so
93, right?
So when I got there in 93, the Japanese economy had entered what would turn out to be decades-long, I wouldn't call it a depression, but a very slow time. I would almost call it recession. And even now, the economy's slowly recovering, but it's been like a 30-year flat line. So when I landed in Japan, my task was simple: to reach out to new inbound companies from Japan and also South Korea, to help retain those companies already in the state of California.
The Korean economy was doing really well at this time, too.
Korea was beginning to move up, and so it was important to also establish an office there in Seoul.
It was one of those countries in East Asia that had, I think 7% growth with GDP, or
It was one of
something
the
close to that.
Right. It was one of the tiger economies in East Asia, and they were moving up until they hit their own flat spot when they required a loan from the International Monetary Fund in order to help their economy survive. So
Wow.
that's a whole nother story, but it was great to be both in Japan and South Korea at that particular moment in time.
So you're at the crossroads of when the Korean economy is booming, the Japanese economy is booming and then kind of takes a downturn, but the U.S. economy is also doing very well in the 90s. How would you say that, what was it like being in your position, obviously with lots of cultural and economic exchanges, and how would you say that developed in California, in the South Bay, in Asian American communities across the United States?
So at that time, the exchange rate between the U.S. dollar and the Japanese yen were much different than now. Today, the yen is at about 150 yen to a dollar. Back when I was in Tokyo, it was 90 yen to a dollar. And so very expensive for the state to maintain an office. but it also created an opportunity for Japanese companies to enter into the U.S. market with a strong currency. And so one of those companies was Panasonic, and they, at the time, digital video disc were, the standard within the industry. And so I remember going to Panasonic, both in Osaka and in Tokyo, meeting with their executives, and we identified a location that happened to be here in the city of Torrance, which eventually led to the establishment of their DVD facility on Madrona.
Madrona and Emerald, right?
Correct. So I was involved with identifying, working with various cities, various counties, addressing issues related to utilities or permits, all of that, and to try and make the process as smooth as possible.
Did you see a significant change in the consumption of Japanese culture here? Japanese, Korean, what was your initial reaction to all of that? How would you say culturally the world has changed since the 1980s, 1990s?
Yeah, during the 80s, because of the growth in the Japanese economy, there were fears on the U.S. side. So you saw in Detroit,
there was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment, right?
There was, and that was reflected on Capitol Hill. There were efforts made to force Japanese manufacturers to identify and create manufacturing in the United States to employ Americans so that Americans weren't displaced by Japanese cars and other manufactured products. I think long-term that's been a good thing, and the Japanese have followed through on their trade commitments. And so as a result, there's manufacturing in the Midwest and the Southeast, not just automotive, but you name it. Just about any manufactured product or technology has been backed by significant Japanese investment.
And then in the 90s, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember hearing this conversation. There was a Korean economic advisor that goes to either the Korean parliament or the president and says, hey, we're making all this money now doing exports for electronics, right? Samsung TVs, things like that. But he shows them this graph where he says, this is how much more money you could be making if you were doing culture, K-drama, music, K-pop. Did that all kind of start in the 90s, and what was your relation to all of that?
So being in Seoul in the 90s, there was the term soft power began to become more popular. And so for many of these economies, they saw how Hollywood had created export product and content that was generating global sales. They wanted a piece of the action as well. The Japanese had seen early success with Godzilla and Japanese.
In the 50s, right?
That started in the 50s.
50s, okay.
And then also early Japanese animation, like Astro Boy. And so for the Koreans, they also saw upside in creating their own content. So I remember we had some initial discussions with a company, Cheil Jadang, that was in discussions with SKG, which was a Hollywood group, Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen. So they were producing movies. And so they invested money in SKG, but they were also beginning to talk about creating other types of content, including music. And so that's when I first started hearing about the startup effort to popularize Korean music and also create Korean content via movies. And so today, when I look at all of the Korean dramas and I see all these K-pop groups, they've put in the time and they've perfected a model which now has global appeal. So for me, having been there at the beginning and just seen the initial moves.
Observing the conversation that was being had.
Right. So it goes all the way from, I tell some of my friends, yeah, I remember when I first heard of a group called Wonder Girls. And these days, there's groups like XG and Blackpink and you name it that are dominating the music industry. So
some of the biggest groups in the world have come out of Korea these days.
That's right. So it's, I think it's a credit to the, to the Korean media and content industry to have grown that quickly. And I think other countries are also looking, to do likewise.
So you come back from Japan in what year?
So my stint with the state ended in 1999. Mm-hmm. So I returned to Los Angeles with my family to reestablish. The family business was, of course, still ongoing, which was in commercial real estate. I had my office for 30 plus years on Western Avenue in Torrance. But at that time, too, I was reconnecting with the community. So one of those connections was through USC and the Asian American Alumni Association. So I became a member of their board, and back in 2007 became president of the APAA.
Of the Asian American Pacific Islander Alumni Association.
Correct. So at that time, I was tracking an event in the state of Washington in which I saw that the University of Washington was planning to issue honorary degrees to those Nisei students whose studies were interrupted by Executive Order 9066 and the evacuation. And so as I watched that, I happened to run into a professor of history at USC, Lon Kurashige, and I remember asking Lon, by the way, Lon...
Another Japanese American?
Correct, a Sansei professor at USC. And I said, hey, I'm watching what's happening in the state of Washington. It looks like it's moving forward in the state of Oregon. What was USC's experience with its Nisei students? And it was then that I learned that of all the West Coast universities, USC stood out as the one university which took punitive action against its former Nisei students.
What do you mean punitive?
So when the executive order was signed and Niseis were being evacuated, the federal government made efforts to help these students who were now in the internment camps to continue with their education in schools in the Midwest and the East Coast. And so they appealed to all the West Coast colleges and universities to issue the transcripts. USC refused to issue transcripts. It was almost as if they completely wiped out the academic history of their students.
Wow.
And then even upon their return after the war, after they got out of the camps, they
wouldn't let them go back.
They were refused admission, saying, we have no record that you were ever a student. So when I found that out, of course, I went to the board and I said, I know we usually only talk about things like tailgate parties and social activities, but I'd like this board to take a position and urge the university to issue honorary degrees and an apology. That led to a 15-year effort to get that done.
I was going to say, USC usually does not apologize for a lot.
It took
that's a
three.
Very high bar.
Correct. It took three different administrations before President Carol Folt assented to that, because at least in her mind, it only made sense.
And this was, what, from 2000 to...
2007 until 2022.
Wow, so that's very recent.
Pretty recent.
Okay. I didn't realize. I thought, okay, yeah, I'd heard of this, but I didn't realize it was as recent as 2022.
Yes. And in 2022, there was a special ceremony held for those students, which also allowed for some of the students to walk or participate in commencement. So there was a father, a mother, and their daughter who who were graduates of the dental school at USC and whose father or grandfather was one of those Nisei
Intern.
students who received the honorary degree. So that was a great day and a great event.
How did that process occur? I mean, I'd assume there was a lot of back and forth. What would you say the most difficult part of that was?
I guess I found that, and this goes back to redress and some lessons learned through redress, it required building a coalition of support, but also I found that it also required, at least on my part, to remain focused, because in the end it was just really myself writing letters to the
No one else was
president.
writing.
By that point, after 15 years, a lot of people had moved on, but I thought that there was a possibility with the new president who was recruited to USC and who was involved in helping to take down a Confederate statue at her university. I thought that there might be an opportunity. So I would write my letters, and one day I got a call, and I thought it was a crank call. Mr. Kaji, I'm calling on behalf of President Folt here at USC. She would like to speak with you. I almost hung up. I thought
You didn't think it was actually happening.
It was hard for me to trust that, but I'm glad
After 15 years. Yeah.
I'm glad I took the call because it finally led to an opening.
Wow. And this was all going on while you were making an effort to be on Torrance City Council as well, because that's 2022.
That's right.
Your term started in July of that year.
Correct. So yeah, this effort sort of preceded or overlapped with the campaign for city council.
When did you decide to make the transition from, I guess, more grassroots activism to actually saying, oh, I want to be an elected official? I know you ran for treasurer in Gardena in the 1980s. Why did you decide to come back to that?
When I got married to my wife, Lisa, I promised to her that I would be a full-time dad, and for our kids, I would not seek public office until a point that they had gone through college and were on their own. So after our youngest daughter was on her way, I said, hey, honey, remember what I said? And she went, no. But with her support, I was able to run for office. Also at the same time, as the oldest son, I was in charge of taking care of my parents. So after they passed my father passed in 2017, and we were able to, work out, estate matters. I was at a point where I could dedicate time if elected. And so that's when I decided to talk to the family and my friends and move forward.
So you've always had intentions of running for some sort of public office, it sounds like.
I had plans. And so when I was single and ran in the 80s, I thought that was a good time, which it was.
Did you get married in Japan?
No, I got married
You
here.
got married here,
yeah,
but you
in
raised
Los Angeles.
your kids in Japan for a little bit.
Just for the first couple of years. And then we returned to Torrance.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I had always kept that in the back of my mind because I felt, based on my accumulated experience, I could help the city of Torrance to move forward. And that's when I decided to throw my hat in.
What would you say, and this is a question I asked when we had Mayor George Chen on, what were some of the issues in 2022? How did the campaign go?
Good question. Back in 2022, some of the major obstacles and challenges facing the city, the major one was financial. I think most people know that the state controller had a dashboard which ranked the cities in the state of California, and based on some of the metrics, which included financial reserves, the city's unfunded pension obligation to CalPERS, the city of Torrance ranked fourth from the bottom. I found that to be inexcusable. I contacted City Hall. I was unable to find out exactly the reasons why, but when I found out that the city's reserves had dipped down to $581,000,
that was the lowest point, right?
That was a low point.
2021.
2021, and then I saw this effort within the city to float a half-cent sales tax.
SST.
SST. I always believed that there was something else that was being hidden from public view. But that was one of my core platforms, was, if elected, to push for a forensic audit of the city so that the public would know clearly what happened to the city's reserves. And so that was one. I, of course, was focused on public safety because we had a growing homeless population in the city of Torrance. Also looking at future development, which included the metro extension of the C line or K line to connect to the regional transit center. So those were the primary concerns at that time, and that's what I campaigned on.
So Toyota leaves Torrance in 2014, 2015, somewhere in those years. What would you say, how did that affect the business community, and was that also kind of an issue in 2022? Because obviously the reserves are down. You're talking about the finances of the city. How was all that investment that was brought in the 60s, 70s, 80s, how did that affect the current financial state?
I remember attending the press conference in front of City Hall after Toyota made their announcement. So the press event was led by then Mayor Frank Scotto. Subsequently, I publicly criticized the city for losing Toyota and its supplier chain due to benign neglect.
How did that happen exactly? I guess we should back up a little bit. Why did Toyota decide to leave?
So Toyota had been in Torrance for almost 50 years and had a significant employment base of Torrance residents, South Bay residents, and plus all of these suppliers to Toyota had offices or facilities either in Torrance or in the South Bay area going out to the ports. So you're talking about thousands of jobs, of high-paying jobs. You're talking about the economic impact of the world's largest auto company here in the city of Torrance, like catering, office supplies, servicing vehicles, air conditioning, you name it. Suddenly for that to leave to the state of Texas didn't just happen overnight. And what I was critical of city leadership was that at no time during that 50-plus year time in Torrance did the city organize an official visit to Toyota City to call on the leaders of Toyota to thank them for their ongoing corporate commitment, to thank them for their employment, thank them for their economic contribution to the life of the city. That never happened. And when I was in Tokyo representing the state of California, I heard those complaints coming from Toyota. And I passed those complaints on to the city of Torrance.
So the Toyota board felt as if the city of Torrance was kind of being ungrateful.
It was both, as I use the term benign neglect. While maybe here on the ground in Torrance, when the mayor and the council or the city manager would interact with Torrance executives, they'd say, hey, it's great to see you. Thank you for your contribution. And yet here I was in Tokyo in meetings, sitting in the lobbies of all these different companies and seeing my competitors, California competitors, the state of Texas, the state of Oregon, the state of Tennessee, they were all there. They're all competing for the same market share.
That is a Toyota headquarter office or Japanese business office in their state.
If any state could sort of claim the crown, it would be to land Toyota Motor USA headquarters, physically move them out of Torrance, out of California to their state. So credit the state of Texas. I credit the economic efforts of North Texas, specifically Plano and Dallas, to attract and successfully relocate Toyota out of Torrance. But it was a huge loss, and what really bothered me was that the local leadership poo-pooed the impact on the city budget, and comments made by the then finance director or the mayor at that time and the administration were that no big deal, we'll find another company to come in.
They didn't think it was a big deal that Toyota left.
They admitted that it was a loss, but they downplayed the loss and the impact on the local economy. And to me, coming from my position, having been in Japan and in Asia, that sort of benign neglect, maybe due to arrogance or the belief that they're too big to leave, created the environment for a state like Texas to say, come to Texas, you won't pay any taxes, we'll give you free land, here's all of our incentives, we'll make it as easy for you to move as possible. And that's what happened.
So how would you say City Council now has addressed that loss?
I'll say this. When I stepped in as a newly elected council member and I sat down with our economic development manager and the city manager, I looked at what tools the city had to either attract or retain business. At the time, the city had no language-specific materials, either printed or online. And so the first step, in whether it was reaching out to the various governments, say the Consulate General of Japan or South Korea, or to those companies that are here like American Honda, was to say, we need to do better. We need to create the right materials that communicate our ongoing interest in meeting their needs, whatever those needs are here in Torrance or statewide. And if we can help in that way, we'll do it. And I'm happy to say that over the course of 3.5 years, Team Torrance has done a great job of refocusing and creating the right materials, business cards that are in Japanese or Korean or Chinese, reaching out to various consulates, even reaching out to American Honda, which when I took office, I found out that relations between American Honda and the city were bad.
Really? Despite them having an office here?
There was no direct contact with American Honda.
To one of the largest businesses in the city.
That's right. And so for the mayor and myself, we reached out to the Japanese Consul General's office, and they provided the connection with the higher-ups at American Honda.
So did the city talk to the Japanese Consul General prior to 2022 then?
I think there were contacts through the Japanese Business Association of Southern California, which holds joint events with the Torrance Area Chamber of Commerce. But specifically,
but it's not as regular as it is now.
Specifically inviting the consulate to visit the city of Torrance, no. There's no history of that. And so, once again, this attitude of benign neglect and too big to move, that seemed to be the standard. That's no longer the standard.
How would you say the Japanese American community in Torrance in the South Bay has changed? Obviously talking about the same events, right? Toyota leaving, and then now talking to the Japanese Consul General, and these conversations we're having. What would you say the transition was from, let's say, 2010 to, I guess, 2022, 2023? Would you say there was an evolution?
There's been a change. Of course, Toyota and its supplier chain leaving left a big hole. But I'd say that
A lot of Japanese families moved to Texas.
well, yeah, Toyota and the other companies, they said, well, if you want to move to Texas, you need to begin to take steps to pack up and move. I think for a lot of the families, to their credit, they didn't sell their homes here because,
Smart move.
yeah, if they were close to retirement, fine, put in your 3 to 5 years there. Fine, move back to the South Bay because the weather in Texas is nothing like
Yeah, I'd much rather
Torrance.
live here.
Yeah, so, yeah, credit to them. But there was, yeah, that was a strange time. And I think for the consulate, they did see opportunities for new Japanese companies to move in. And so the popularity of Japanese cuisine, Japanese food, sushi, sake, whiskey, the popularity of Japan as a tourist destination, that's taken off. Shogun, J-pop, you name it. It's sort of helped to fill gaps. And so as we're seeing new companies come in like Sony Honda Mobility of America, they see an opportunity because of the Japanese American and Japanese expatriate population here.
Largest in the 48 continuous states.
That's right. So if you're going to enter the market, what better place than Torrance?
So you would say all of these, the gap that Toyota left was filled by a lot of soft power then? Food, cuisine, travel, tourism,
It's
culture.
being filled by, a range of different companies. There's a company from Kashiwa that's here,
The sister city.
the sister city of Torrance. There are new to market companies that we're now in discussions with who are considering establishing their U.S. headquarters here. So Japan is still a big market, and it only makes sense to take full advantage of what we have to offer. And so I think we're going to continue
How would you
to
go about that?
It's in Asia. I can't speak about other parts of the world, but since I'm sort of focused on the Asian market for the last 50 years,
Most of your experiences.
most of my professional experience has been there, and it requires face time. You have to show your commitment to the market by physically going there and meeting people in their offices and understanding what their manufacturing requirements are, or what their intellectual property is, how they're looking at entering the market. And only by getting on the ground and seeing it all, you're also showing a commitment to them as a company that other cities and other regions may not show, because they may expect them to come here to the States. But to go that extra mile, to cultivate those relationships,
To go in person and speak to these businesses.
that counts for everything. And so over the course of my professional career, I spent years in the market. I don't know how many hundreds of flights back and forth, but that's led to, I think, what we've seen over the course of time.
What would you say obviously Torrance is pursuing a lot of Friendship City deals, right? The mayor talked about this. Would you say that's also kind of part of that in-person interaction that you were talking about?
When Shohei Ohtani was signed up by the Dodgers, I watched that from my office at City Hall. I knew it was coming. And as
Do you have contacts with the MLB?
Well, as I saw it, it just came to mind that since the city of Torrance has friendship cities, why not reach out to the hometowns of Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto? And so the council, I put it in front of the council. They said yes. And I believe as a result, we're seeing direct economic benefit because the LA Dodgers have gone back to back.
Shohei's dad was here. Yes, and the Dodgers won. The Dodgers won, but also, bringing the Little League team from Oshu, Iwate Prefecture here to play games against our own high school teams and seeing the reaction here on the ground in Torrance, it validates the value of these relationships. What was meeting Shohei's dad like? Was that, when he came here over the summer, was that your first interaction with him face to face?
That was the first time to meet him. I had studied about him, but never had an opportunity to actually meet him in person. So to have the father of the unicorn or the goat of Major League Baseball here in our city, and also all those team members, those teenagers who were here and had just a tremendous time while they were here in Torrance. They went to Dodger Stadium, they went to Angel Stadium, they went to Disneyland, Torrance Beach.
You spent a good amount of time with them, right?
I did. I learned that he likes golf, so I went to play golf with him. And when you spend a day with somebody and you see how they play golf,
who's the better golfer? Honest.
We'll leave that for a future discussion.
Okay. When he comes back next summer, right?
I'll let him address that question.
What would you say? You have all of these Asian business, Asian American things going on in the city, right? Shohei's dad is here. You have a baseball team coming from Japan. Sony Honda Mobility is here. It seems like, from what you've described, a lot of the soft power of Japanese, Korean, Asian culture in general is coming to the city. And in Columbia Park, we're getting a World War II memorial for internment. What would you say the future of the Asian American community looks, not just in your city, but nationally?
To talk about the World War II Camp Wall memorial, which is, I guess, will begin construction next year, that creates a value add to our largest city park. Rather than just being a place for recreation and for community gatherings, it adds an educational dimension. Because it's in the city of Torrance, and because of the city's position after Executive Order 9066 was signed, which was to speak out in support of its Japanese American residents.
Torrance was the only city nationally to protest 9066.
It was the only city to stand up for its residents. I think the other city was Gallup, New Mexico, but Gallup, New Mexico was outside of the exclusion zone. But on the West Coast, it's the only city I'm aware of that took that position. So I think Torrance is a special place, and to create a facility that can help educate not only Americans but visitors from around the world about the importance of protecting due process and civil rights, and also to look at how a small community responded to that violation of their rights and how they came back.
Would you say that the fight to get the camp wall here Was it as tough of a fight as, say, Redress in the 80s or getting the diplomas for USC?
I think
Contrast those three with me and kind of walk through
well
what happened.
the effort led by Dr. Kanji Sahara to establish the Camp Wall Memorial in Torrance that preceded my time on the city council, but I'm glad that I could be on the council that approved the location in the city of Torrance. So, but I think, yeah, if you look over the history of the city going back 100 years, I think that the general view of the Japanese American community as stakeholders, as fellow residents, has always been good. And so standing up this memorial, I think, is a credit to the city and the residents who know what happened and are willing to create this. And once again, I look at our city's parks and public places as having more than just a single purpose. And for the city of Torrance, I think we can add to our the reasons for people to visit. And education, especially in this particular instance, I think does create a new incentive to visit.
From what I know, the Japanese American population here has always been quite significant. I think at the time of 9066, it was 1 in 11 were Japanese American. Maybe you know better, correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, the only Medal of Honor recipient from Torrance, Ted Tanoe, 442nd, just like so many Nisei, and completely integral to Torrance's history. What would you say the future of Asian America looks like? We can go local and then we can go national.
Looking at the legacy of Ted Tanoe, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, and looking back on the history of the community here in Torrance, I think is worthwhile. What happens next is really up to your generation. For myself, I
Don't put the pressure on me.
Oh, it is on you and your generation. For myself, since I am the oldest on the council, much of what I've achieved is behind me. So I'm looking ahead to whatever may happen next. But I am hopeful that for not only those within the Japanese community, but for all Torrance residents who are now going through school, moving through college, entering their careers, it's really up to the next generation to take what's here and to add to it and to make Torrance a better place. So I'm excited to see what direction that goes in. And it always requires effort and seeking consensus. But to me, that's the beauty of being in a democracy, because eventually, you do have to make a decision and move forward.
What do you think the future of Asian American business looks like? Obviously, you've been involved in that exchange since the 80s, early 90s. You've seen it evolve a lot in the last 30 years, right? K-pop went from being just an idea to now taking over even the U.S. billboards.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say the next 30 to 40 years looks like? Business, culture?
Yeah, I guess looking ahead, I try not to apply any ethnic tags or categories. To me, great ideas will always help to move advances in our society. Right now, the conversation focuses on AI. Justin Wong of NVIDIA, Taiwanese American, leads that company with a market cap of $4 trillion and north. So it's great to see how the United States continues to attract entrepreneurs, pioneers, which leads to, cutting edge discoveries, and which I believe helps to advance the, American dream and American ideals globally. And I'm always hopeful. I'm always tend to be optimistic about what's next. So the role that I see for Asian Americans and Torrance residents in what happens next, I think can be very significant and should be significant. I do hope that others consider serving in public office, also serving in government full-time, and will be able to integrate best practices, new technologies, and enable us to look over the horizon and to create a better city, a better Los Angeles County, a better California, and a better world.
Last question for you. What are your interests, hobbies? What do you like to do for fun?
So I just came from 2 weeks of vacation in Japan. Met a lot of people, a lot of foreigners visiting Japan, some for the first time. Some,
not just from the U.S.
Not just all over, Europe, China, Southeast Asia, Latin America. And I enjoy talking to so many different people and hearing about what their views are of Japan, what their takeaways will be when they return to their own country, what they see as maybe some improvements Japan can make when it comes to immigration and diversity, because they have a shrinking population. They're going to need to integrate immigrants in different positions. And in those discussions, I said, well, I come from California, I come from Torrance. Diversity is a everyday occurrence. So I like thinking that, from that trip, my takeaways were, just being able to interact with the world and seeing them on holiday like myself, seeing what interests them, seeing what trends are in their own cities. And I'd like to think that here in Torrance, we can also attract global visitors and have a free exchange of ideas, because I think that helps to maintain the vitality of our local economy, and it makes life more interesting.
Hobbies. You mentioned golf.
Golf is a hobby. It's also tough. It does take my mind off of everything else. It's sort of a form of self-flagellation, punishment. It reminds me that, yes, no one's perfect, but in spite of whatever you do, you got to own it, and you got to recover and do the best you can. So golf is one of those. I used to fish a lot. I think I may take up fishing again.
You should go with my dad. My dad loves fishing.
Okay. Well, we can trade fish stories sometime in the future.
He'll wake up at like 4 a.m. and go.
Maybe I won't start fishing.
You won't wake up at 4 a.m. and go fishing?
I used to. Let me rethink that.
Anything else you'd like to share?
I am, let's see. I think for the city of Torrance and serving on the council, it's really been an honor. And as I've focused on District 1 and meeting with residents whenever they've raised their hand and needed something, I've really enjoyed meeting everybody at their homes, in the parks, at the library, at the restaurants, just listening to them, what their concerns are. And if anything, it's sort of consistent with how I've been. I like to solve problems. I like to make introductions if those introductions help to address an issue or create a solution. So I find this just to be it's not strange to me. It's something that I've always tried to do throughout my life, is to be a good Boy Scout. And I'm looking forward to continued service.
Jon Kaji, thank you so much.
Thank you.